Joining us now for some analysis, Wall Street Journal columnist and editorial board member Kimberley Strassel, plus Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson, who was a speechwriter for President George W. Bush. David Gergen worked for both Presidents Reagan and Clinton and is now with Harvard University. Bob Shrum is a Democratic strategist and a significant one at that. I want to go around the table. Kimberley, I want to start with you. Give me your 30, 40-second take on the latest Christie developments and whether or not this intensifies his political turmoil.
Have we learned anything new? We have not. We've had an accusation that there may be evidence, no evidence actually put out there yet, that he knew. But again, the central question has not been answered. I do think what is significant here, though, is that you're beginning to get a sense of the political risks here on a bigger scale. For Christie, it's the idea that this could go on for months and months, and that's what it's beginning to look like. Although I think for the other side, too, the Democratic side, the risk that there is beginning to be a sense of a bit of a pile-on, and that this might be more politically driven than it is substance driven.
Michael, what does it say to you about what came out of the Christie camp this weekend and its sort of pushback, not just on the facts, but on the allegation from David Wildstein, who has known the governor for a good long while?
Yeah, well, you have to admit that these are vague, unsubstantiated charges, but there are traditional questions here about whether the governor is a bully, which he completely denies. But he used his press conference to attack his opponent in this case as a high school loser. And now his staff is releasing memos, attacking him when he's 16 years old as unstable. You can't undo a bad image, a bad public image, by confirming it with your tactics. And I think they have to be very careful the way they conduct themselves in this very difficult fight.
Bob, what does it tell you, based on your experience in politics, when you see internecine fights like this playing out on a public stage?
Well, I said to David earlier, we've heard all of this before, where you attack people because they're seeking immunity, they've got a self-interest. It tends to end badly. I think Chris Christie may end up, as time goes on, worried less about going to the White House and more about going to the big house. And I think that is actually a real threat for him. This is a stupid scandal. He was going to win this election overwhelmingly. He or his staff did not have to engage in hardball tactics. They opened a can of corrupt worms, this stuff that went on in Hoboken or that's alleged to have gone on in Hoboken, and they put it all in emails. Now he's collapsing in Republican polls for 2016. His favorable, unfavorable is upside down. I've never seen a supposed frontrunner for a nomination implode so fast.
Right, you're not a disinterested party in this
No, actually,
conversation.
You're right.
Democrats would like to see Chris Christie fall and tumble, but I want to get back to what you said about the criminality. You believe that there is significant criminal downside risk for the governor?
Oh, I think there is risk. He's going to get called in by the U.S. attorney, I assume, at some point, ask when he knew. And he's either going to stick to the story he had in that press conference, or he's going to give a different story. But what he says under oath better be true.
David, you've worked in White Houses under significant stress, legal and political. What's your take?
Well, I think we ought to distinguish between legal versus political trouble. I don't think he's in legal trouble right now. There's been no allegation and indeed no evidence to suggest he broke any law, that he knew beforehand, that he ordered this, and that he's behind it, in effect, which I think would put him in legal jeopardy and I think raise all the questions that Bob said. But I think his political problems are growing rapidly. As Kimberley points out, this could go on for a couple of months. Every week that goes by when he's in the news with this sort of geeky, awful stuff, it just hurts him politically. And now, very importantly, we do have someone who's very close to him who's turned on him and said, basically, you've been lying, not about whether you did it or not, but you've been lying about when you knew. And I think if he's found to have lied on that, he's in deep political trouble. I think his road to the White House is blocked. And indeed, the New York Star-Ledger, biggest newspaper in the state, left-leaning but endorsed him this last time out, has said, as you pointed out earlier, has said he has to resign. That's his political problem, not his legal problem, but it's politically difficult.
Quickly around the table, Republican Governors Association. Governor Christie is the leader of it. Should he stay in that position, or do you believe what Rudy Giuliani said, he needs to stay and fight because if he steps down, he will just give in to the opposition?
I think that's a tough question the governors are going to have to. If this keeps going, somebody else comes out a little bit more, and there's more. This is a corrosive story. I think there'll be pressure from within the Governors Association to suspend his chairmanship.
Bob, if this were a Democrat under similar stress and the Democratic Governors Association position was up for grabs, what would you recommend?
Well, I don't think it matters what I would recommend because I think the guy would stay as long as he possibly could. The truth of the matter is, If there's nothing to hide here, they ought to release all the emails. Get this over with. He can be governor of New Jersey, he can run for president, he can be head of the RGA.
Mike?
I think there'll be more clarity in just a few more weeks as this investigation in the New Jersey legislature continues and things clarify. So I guess I think he'll wait and see what the
premature to
situation.
step
It
in
would
now.
be premature.
I mean, for now, I mean, right? Why would he? Again, what new has actually come out? An allegation, but there has been no significant shift in the basis of information we have here.
Kimberly, what was your takeaway from House Majority Leader Eric Cantor? I pressed him twice on what the House Republican principles on immigration actually said, and he wasn't even comfortable saying what they said on camera. What do you think House Republicans actually are as opposed to what they've represented rhetorically?
You know, I was actually out at the Republican retreat for a bit this week, and I mean, here's the good news. The Republicans, there's a growing number of Republicans who do seem to understand that they are going to have to address this issue at some time. And by the way, that's a big shift from even a year ago. I think there's bad news too, which is that you see them coming up with a huge number of excuses why not to do it now. There's always going to be those political excuses. This year's not going to be good. Next year's not going to be good. Going into a presidential election is not going to be good. And you saw one of them. Now, this is also coming up in the context, which is partly an excuse, but I also think is one of the consequences of this administration's leadership, is that this is coming up as the debate is now raging about the president's overstepping of his authority, his decision to not enforce some laws. For instance, not deport younger people, not enforce part of the immigration laws or the drug laws when it comes to marijuana. And so that is giving Republicans an excuse, too, to say, hey, if we were to pass immigration, we wouldn't be able to trust you to actually implement the pieces of it we care about.
Mike, of course, this issue is filtered through the matrix of Republican presidential aspirations. Demographically, it seems to be an imperative. At least some Republicans have come to that conclusion. If you believe that's the case, and tell me if you don't, how do you think these Republican principles fit into that longer party conversation?
Well, it's hard to look at the evidence and not come to that conclusion. It's hard to win national elections with 27% of the Hispanic vote, which is what Mitt Romney got.
Impossible, actually.
Right. It's pathetic moving forward. I think serious Republicans know this. They question the timing before the midterms. I think there are serious questions here. But as far as the 2016 election, that's probably the place you're going to get the real leadership on this issue, because it's a national political problem. These primaries are going to be a test of how rational the Republican process is when it comes to immigration. On one side, you have a primal scream. On the other side, you have a political strategy. And it's going to be a test as it moves forward.
Yeah, David, this is an issue in which it's not only whether you get a law passed, but whether you're seen as dragged, kicking and screaming to pass the law, or whether you're actually in favor of it, heart and soul. This is an issue on which the Republicans, instead of sort of dancing back, need to be very aggressive. We need to solve this problem. And let the White House or let the Democrats be the ones who are picking fights and slowing it down. The Republicans will get nothing out of this politically in 2016 if they're dragged over the finish line.
They may actually end up in a worse position.
Yeah.
Because one of the principles that they proposed, which is that people can stay here legally but there's no path to citizenship, would essentially create apartheid in America, where millions or tens of millions of people would work, would pay taxes, would have no rights as citizens. That won't solve the Republican problem with Hispanics. It will exacerbate it. It will actually make it a permanent feature of the electoral cycle.
Right.
But Republicans are not saying they're behind the rest of people in the line. The question is how long the line
want legal status, not citizenship.
Apartheid is an incendiary word. These are not
okay,
native
second-class citizens.
There is a legal distinction there. Would you not agree?
Well, we had for generations in this country, to our shame, the incredible spectacle of millions of Americans living primarily in the South who were unable to vote because of the color of their skin. Are we now going to create a system in which millions of people living in this country, primarily Hispanics, are unable to vote, but they can work and they can pay taxes? I think that would be bad, and I think it would,
everyone on a green card in this country right now is a second-class citizen?
no, because people on a green card in this country can apply for citizenship.
Well, so would
With
this be
Ronald
legal
Reagan and
status?
George
That's
Ronald
the
Reagan and
plan
George
that most-
W.
That's the
Bush.
plan that everyone agrees.
That is the Republican plan.
The plan is
Exactly.
not. The plan is not a guaranteed path to citizenship for all of those 11 or 12
You would
million
have the
people who are
option
here.
to use every existing pathway to get
But
citizenship.
it's
Now,
but
just
it
like
might
any
take
green
you
card
20
over.
or
And
30
I didn't
or
realize
40
it,
years.
ladies and gentlemen, but what you just saw was like what happened at the House Republican Conference in Cambridge, Maryland.
You mean I was there?
Exactly. Let's talk about debt ceiling. Do you think that this is a surrender maneuver with just complicated language around
Surrender.
it, Kimberly?
I don't know if I would use those words. I think here's what is going to happen. And it's why Mr. Cantor didn't really want to come out. But they're going to use this to highlight some issues that they care about, obviously. One of them will probably be this question about a bailout for Obamacare. And they're going to send it to the Senate. And the Senate's probably going to send it back to them stripped of anything else. And that's going to be a bit galling for Republicans because, you know, it is true.
But
this
eventually they'll
president,
have to swallow it.
Yeah, but I think they will in the end. I mean, they want the president to go with the past, in which in the past we have actually had the big debates and passed something with the debt ceiling. But in the end, they've got a better hand to do talking about Obamacare and everything else, and so they're not going to.
But you've already lost your leverage when you've announced that you've accepted the outcome, which every single member of the leadership has. So I think they
By
would
saying
like
there'll be no default.
Right, exactly. So they want some cover, which sometimes they get, but this is seeking a dignified form of surrender.
Well, I don't think that. I think the Republican game plan this year amounts to this, that the table is pretty well set for a very good 2014. Right. They can keep the House. They got a real shot in winning the Senate. What they want to do is have nothing now that gets in the way of getting to there. So they don't want any big disruptions in which they have a real setback for the party, and I think that's the reason they're accepting these tactical
I think that's
agreements.
exactly right. I think a default that would be blamed on the Republicans would not only make sure they couldn't get the Senate, it would jeopardize their control of the House. Listening to Cantor, and I thought you asked the questions wonderfully and over and found different ways. Listening to Cantor, it sounded to me like Robert E. Lee was asking Grant if he could just write a more complicated surrender document.
Let me ask you briefly.
That's a long way from apartheid to Robert E. Lee. Wow.
Wow.
You came ready with your game faces there. Okay.
No, I thought of that just sitting here, actually.
Let me ask you briefly, David and Bob, about this contention from the president that he can use executive power, use it to transform the country if Congress won't move along with him. But the first two examples, this sort of glorified passbook savings account and a minimum wage for future federal contractors, seems extremely small and almost seems to prove the point that his executive authority is actually very limited. What's your take?
I think absolutely right. There's a quote attributed to Churchill. It said, "Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood." And that's exactly what's going on here. This is small bore stuff that is a small bore turned into a big snore in terms of the State of the Union. And he didn't move his numbers. And I think he's got to find some way to mobilize the country. He's right about trying to create jobs. He's right about trying to deal with the unemployment and the subnormal situation we have. But he ought to make that a crusade that's big. It's got a lot to it. And mobilize people.
We got about a minute and a half left, Bob.
Look, Ronald Reagan had 381 executive orders. George Bush had 291. They dealt with very big things in some cases, like deregulating oil production, crude oil production, and petroleum refining. I think the president's going to find some very big areas to exercise authority. I think we'll hear a lot of Republican crocodile tears on this. But presidents can do a lot with executive orders. John F. Kennedy desegregated all federal housing, which was a lot of housing, with a stroke of a pen. And Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces
And it
the
goes
same way.
beyond executive orders. It's about agency regulations. There's a lot that he can do.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so we're going to go around the table. Who's going to win and what's the score? Kimberly.
Well, I'm not going to do the score. I'm from Seattle. I mean, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so I got to be a Seattle fan.
Okay. Lopsided victory or close?
I think it's going to be close.
Okay, Michael?
I think when a team is led by a middle-aged man that people think are past their prime, I have a rooting interest.
So do I.
I'm going to go with Denver in this case, like I think many in my situation.
Thinking of middle-aged men, I guess we're talking about Obama, too. And people trying to write him off. Look, I think Denver's going to win. I think Manning is an amazing presence. I think Seattle's a great defense. And I'm hoping the Patriots get there next year.
I'm a Patriots guy, so the team that beat the Patriots, I want them to win the Super
Is
Bowl.
anyone going to put a score on the table?
37-34.
I thought about a touchdown. The Broncos by a touchdown.
Because I want to be able to agree with Bob, I'll do that.
You've been
Write
looking
it down,
for
folks. Denver 24. Listen closely. Denver 24, Seattle 21.
All
Back in a
right,
moment with
all
our
right.
Face the Nation flashback. Please stay with us.